I'd have to imagine that a lot of the monster subspecies created in the first generation games can be a little tough to work with. At their inception, and in some cases still to this day, several of them feel very much like palette swaps. Most of them possess the same elements as their monster of origin, very similar attack patterns, behaviors, and hunting grounds. For example, the purple Gypsyros really only distinguishes himself mechanically with the implementation of Toxin, which is just stronger poison. Even monsters who should have some grounds to separate themselves from their base monster can struggle to do so. The green Plesioth is built for jungle camouflage, but can still make its way into desert maps. The black Gravios is the way he is because volcanic heat has seared his shell, and yet he can be seen wandering in swamps and forested regions. Not to say that I think it should be impossible for there to be some territory crossover in an ecological sense, but these two have had some ability to make themselves distinct in-game squandered by not being limited to the territories that they're built for. Now, as these monsters have gotten a bit older and have had more appearances and more recent entries, they've gained a few unique moves here and there to help differentiate the fights a decent amount. And the upgrades these guys have received have done some legwork to warrant their continued place in Monster Hunter game rosters. The aforementioned Black Gravios is more skilled with his fire attacks than the regular Gravios in certain ways. The Red Kezu is a faster, more aggressive predator than the normal Kezu and makes better use of his extendable net. The Black Diablos is notably more tenacious and can combo her charges into dig attacks more easily than the regular Diablos. But with a lot of overlapping elements and body structures and map usage remaining, many of the classic monster variations can still very much feel like the prototype subspecies that paved the way for creations like, say, Coral Puki, Glacial Ignactor, Tidal Najarala, Bloodbath Diablos, Primordial Malzeno, and a lot of other phenomenal monster variations that have been created in recent days. A lot of the newer subspecies are built with new habitats or elements or gameplay mechanics built into their design from the get-go, recontextualizing the original monster into a new enemy that is similar yet entirely its own battle. And a lot of this comes down to the fact that many of the original monster subspecies were designed as genetic mutations that speciated. A blue Yan Kutku compared to a regular Kutku is kinda like a chocolate lab compared to a black lab, and if you know anything about dogs, black labs don't tend to develop new elemental abilities and alter their attack animations all that much. And for that reason, I think a lot of the Generation 1 subspecies, and a few like them, will likely continue to struggle at least somewhat with differentiating themselves for a little while. That is, unless the proper care and attention is given to them. Now, two monsters who I think struggle quite a bit with their own identity, and absolutely deserve to have the proper care, attention, and respect, are Azure Rathalos and Pink Rathian. Azure Rathalos is the flagship of Monster Hunter G, the game that created the concept of subspecies and monster variations. If Rathalos is the symbol of the monsters of Monster Hunter, then Azure Rathalos is the symbol of their variations, the multitude of creative directions you can push and pull established creatures in to create unique new encounters. And Azure and his pink cohort, well, they don't really feel that unique themselves, and I'd like for that to change. The fact that the Monster Hunter devs took the real-world concept of animal populations diverging due to mutations, evolved traits, and alterations in food and habitat, and reinterpreted that into their fictional animals in Monster Hunter is a phenomenal idea in of itself. And I think the two creatures from whom this trend began deserve to be examples of some of the best this idea has to offer. I'd love for Azure Rathalos and Pink Rathian to not feel like roster padding when next they return. First of all, let's talk about the issues Azure Rathalos and Pink Rathian are facing and why they struggle to really keep a foothold. Azure Rathalos is built to embellish Rathalos' signature trait, that being his aerial combat. He really cements the title of King of the Skies. Pink Rathian is built to embellish the standard Rathian signature move, that being her poison-inflicting backflip. Pink Rathian has her own moves that expand upon the backflip, as well as a greater ability to combo into these attacks. One of the major problems that comes up with Azure and Pink is that a lot of their traits and attacks continue to be pilfered by other Rathaloses and Rathians. I have suggested his content numerous times, and I will do so once again. For a more in-depth look at the evolution of the Raths and their movesets, I'll point you towards Heavy Wings. With Azure Rathalos, he would consistently be one step ahead of the regular Rathalos in terms of aerial skills. He'd usually have access to a combo that Rathalos didn't, or a speed in his attacks that Rathalos couldn't match. And game by game, the regular Rathalos would pick up pretty much every single trick that Azure had to offer. Which isn't bad for Rathalos, it makes him a much more interesting combatant in the air, but it leaves next to no moves left over to be unique for Azure Rathalos. And as the move pools get bigger and bigger, the differences between the two can get harder to point out, and players would be forgiven if they thought the only difference between the two is that Azure flies more. And people generally do not like fighting Rathalos in midair, which makes Azure not particularly well liked. Pink Rathian suffers a similar issue, but not quite the same level of distaste. She can put a diagonal spin on her backflip attacks, altering the angle of the famous tail move. She can also cancel charges into said backflip, making her more difficult to predict. The issue here is that she is continuously outdone by the Gold Rathian, who tends to get pretty much all of Pink Rathian moves, but even better and flashier, which makes Pink feel pretty much just like a middle child. And I suppose that's fitting, considering she is in the middle of the three in terms of strength, but she can really struggle to feel like anything other than a lesser Gold Rathian sometimes. The advantage Pink has over Azure is that her gimmick is much less maligned. Her alternative backflip attack can be tricky and fast, but they aren't the most difficult things in the world to predict and avoid if you're paying attention. So we have two subspecies with some alright ideas baked into their mechanics, but they struggle to keep any attacks to themselves. Their contemporaries always seem to be either one step ahead or just catching up to their innovations. So what can we do? The easy answer, of course, is to just give them a handful of brand new attacks and gatekeep those from the other members of the family. And we will brainstorm about that, but first, I decided to do a little research into how Pink and Azure work ecologically, and see if I could come up with some mechanical and behavioral changes to help these two stand out, and I think I found some solutions. So the main questions for me were, what process actually creates Azure Rathalos and Pink Rathian, and how can I use that to redesign them? Basically, these two are a result of overdevelopment in the outer shell. It's denser, heavier, and discolored on these subspecies. As this mutation cemented itself more in Rath bloodlines, those who developed it would gradually come to adapt to what should have been a massive disadvantage. In fact, the Rath subspecies overcorrected. To compensate for the increased weight of their shells, Pink and Azure Raths developed stronger muscles. So much stronger, in fact, that Azure's and Pink's are faster, stronger, and more nimble than the typical Raths, despite being denser and much more heavily armored. That's why Azure is a stronger flyer than a Rathalos, and Pink is more acrobatic in the air than a typical Rathian. So these two are the offensive and defensive superiors to the typical Rath species. They're also much more aggressive, and that's what we're looking for. The main drawback these two have is their vibrant, discolored shells. They do not camouflage very easily, and have to be tenacious to survive at a young age. So, fully grown Pink and Azure Raths are the most hostile that the species has to offer. I've talked a lot on this channel about how good Rathalos' fight in Sunbreak is, and how smart he feels, so we're gonna tweak that a bit. Let's make the new Azure and Pink belligerent. They can still have complex movesets and combos and fast-moving attacks, but I say have them overextend. Let them be greedy, not as skilled about mix-ups as some of the others are. This type of gameplay change would be subtle, for sure, but if you looked for it, I think you would start to notice that Azure and Pink attack a bit longer than they have to sometimes. That they might seem to have an incredibly aggressive and oppressive attack structure that feels overwhelming, but these structures could have more vulnerabilities in them. You could have it so that very experienced players would have an easier time punishing Pink and Azure's attacks than they may have for even the regular Rathalos and Rathian. A potential solution is making some of the other Raths feel smarter to make Pink and Azure feel more reckless by proxy. For example, another one of Rathian's more well-known attacks is her simple triple charge. With a regular Rathian and Gold Rathian, you could have it so that their AI could notice if you've cleared enough distance or are at an inopportune angle and cancel out of the triple charge into another move. but Pink Rathian won't. You could make it so that Azure Rathalos has more attacks in the air than the regular Rathalos. However, the regular Rathalos' AI would have much more free-flowing combo patterns, picking better moves for better angles, and Azure's combo structure could be a lot more static. Obviously, you don't want to push the dichotomy too far and have Pink and Azure deliberately missing several attacks, but I do think that making them faster and stronger and more brutal, yet more predictable, could be a very cool way to separate Pink and Azure. As the AI of the monsters in Monster Hunter improves, the developers can use the enhanced decision-making to say a lot about how intelligent and cunning the monsters are. Alternatively, the lack of certain levels of AI complexity can also be used to say a lot about how reckless, voracious, and overcome with violent tendencies a different monster could be. Another way you can reflect the more aggressive behavior of Pink and Azure is through their non-combat interactions with the worlds, where you might have Rathalos and Rathian occasionally hunt small monsters for food and sometimes just kind of coexist around them. Have Pink and Azure proactively chase away or kill most other animals around them. You know how in World a lot of the fight on sight boss monsters will give you a warning roar if you get too close before the fight properly starts? Have Pink and Azure give no such warning. Forgo that. Have them attack on sight. You could even have it so that they're more likely to enter zones where you're fighting another monster, and now you have a hyper-aggressive Rath that is either reduced a battle to pure chaos, or could be manipulated into a potent weapon against your target monster if you utilize proper positioning or other hunting tools. These have all been relatively smaller AI and behavioral tweaks thus far, but I think this extra layer of personality is important to establish. The monsters have been getting easier to define by their temperaments as these games try to delve more and more into how they function as animals in their habitats. So I propose using these tools at our disposal to turn Pink Rathian and Azure Rathalos into the most ill-tempered, barbaric, and reckless versions of the species. It fits their lore, and it makes dealing with them on the map a different experience than it would be for the regular or even the metal Raths. So now that we have all this groundwork all nice and set up, let's create some new attacks for these two. Let's go with Pink Rathian to start. First and foremost, she's going to do a little thieving of her own. Rise's Apex Rathian has one unique trick all to herself, and let's face it, she's never coming back, so let's give her technique to a better Rathian and not let it go to waste. Apex Rathian can double up on the Pink Rathian's diagonal backflip. Not only is this cherry-picking a combo that may have been lost to time otherwise, but I think it really symbolizes our want to make Pink Rathian very aggressive, but uncareful. Additionally, I say we reinstate her Fire Bite attack from the 3rd and 4th generation versions of the monster. Aesthetically, I think this move matches the design choice we want for her, that she is fueled with so much fury that flames burst from her mouth. I was also considering looking at Dread Queen Rathian to steal some attacks from, as she has some very cool tail moves of her own, but I kind of want to leave the door open for the potential of the deviant monsters returning, so I didn't want to steal too much from her. There are, however, some moves that I think Pink, and perhaps by extension the other Rathians, could benefit from with the Monster Hunter Online incarnation of the Wyvern Queen. This version of Rathian has some pretty exceptional changes to the monster's kit, including reversible tail spins, slightly angled alternatives to the traditional backflip, and a spinning ascent into the air that follows up with a roar and goes into a backflip. Some of these moves might be best suited for Pink and Gold Rathian exclusively, in case you don't want to overtune the regular Rathian too much. As for brand new stuff, I say give her the ability to combo her diagonal backflip and her standard backflip together. As I said earlier, I'm not really looking for combo canceling into other attacks with Pink and Azure. However, giving her the ability to either double up on the same backflip or swap between the two in a combo is a good way to still give her mix-ups and keep the player on their toes, having to guess which attack is going to be thrown out, and needing to pick up on subtle tells as to which move is going to come out next. Another idea I had was to have her be able to breathe a fireball during her charges. Perhaps She charges at like a weird angle that looks like she should miss, but she's really trying to get a little bit of space away from you to fire off a projectile at you. You could use this as an opening to the Rathian triple charge combo. I was originally considering giving her a variety of new angles on her tail flipping abilities, but I didn't want to put her up in the air too much. Rathian is supposed to be the queen of the land, so I wanted to give Pink a bit of extra danger when she's on the ground. Plus, as someone who doesn't adore the triple charge combo, I think this would be a good way to change up the technique in a method that's a bit flashier and probably a little bit more fun to deal with. Naturally, I would want all these changes gate-kept from Gold Rathian. You know, you can let her keep her fancy Hellfire and her combo canceling and all that. Gold can be nice and flashy and intricate, and Pink can be a bit more grungy and barbaric. Now let's talk about Azure Rathalos. Azure Rathalos has a potential advantage coming back into Wilds, or another game, probably going to be in Wilds. That being that while he was gone, Rathalos in general had some great improvements made to his flying combat in Rise and Sunbreak. Talked about this to death, but for the courtesy of those who have not watched the other 85 Rathalos videos on this channel, in brief summation, Rathalos, now more than ever, is extremely competent at combining his aerial attacks together, and the majority of his aerial combos result in him landing. The distribution of time between him flying and being on the ground is far more balanced. He meanders in the air much less, and his attacks in the air chain so well and so quick that you constantly have something to react to or counter, keeping the pace of the fight feeling much more intense. The amount of time just whacking at his claws or tail while he hovers has dropped drastically. So this is the model we want to use for Azure Rathalos, but we want to push it a bit further. Make Azure even better as an aerial blitzer while balancing out his time on the ground better. This design choice will retain Azure's position as the better flyer while reaping the benefits of Rathalos' aerial combat changes. I've got a move I'd really like to see him use. It's essentially Legiana's corkscrew dive attack, but I kind of want to add a bit to it to make it Azure's. So, you know in Godzilla, King of the Monsters, when Rodan's chasing the fighter jets and he wipes them all out at the end with that big barrel roll attack? I want that. I really want that. Not only would that look really cool, especially if he gets those nice big gorgeous green wings back, but what you could do is have Azure move much slower than Legiana does, giving the attack more surface area and making it easier to counterattack, so weapons like Lance or Longsword could get some free hits off on the wings while he's doing it. And playing off how aggressive and reckless we want Azure Rathalos to be, you could follow up this barrel roll with him always landing after it and kinda staggering as he touches down, like he got dizzy doing that kind of attack. Give a hunter who knows how to capitalize on the move a nice big opening to get some hits in. Another idea I had would be for Azure Rathalos to snag you off the ground and carry you around a little before throwing you or stamping into the dirt or slamming you into another hunter or something. Give him a couple of options to play with. I've always loved the idea of monster pin attacks, granting the monsters a bit more manipulation of the hunter. Perhaps while you're ensnared, your arms are pinned, but other players can free you with flash pods. I don't have a lot of specific ideas for extending his aerial combos, but I think he would benefit from taking what Rathalos can do in Sunbreak and extending things by just a move or two. You don't want to overextend his air combos, because those could get boring to deal with if they run too long, even if Azure's improved ground time and more interesting attack patterns make the fight better overall. You want to just add an extra flamethrower or an extra claw dive or bite attack in midair, just here and there to make the strings feel a little bit more like his own. I wanted to think up moves where Azure is close enough to the ground that you can hit him more, but he's still flying, again, maintaining his aerial expertise, yet making him a bit more fun to hit. So I came up with an attack somewhat reminiscent of Seregios. Seregios has a combo where he'll stand on the ground and lash out with the talons on his feet, snapping at hunters right in front of him. I would have Azure do something very similar, though I'd have his claw attacks be these bigger slashes to differentiate the animations. Have him do 2 or 3 in a row, and this should bring his wings, his tail, and his torso a little bit lower, giving him more easily attackable areas than melee hunters would normally have while he's flying. And finally, with Azure, I want to pull out an old classic from Rathalos history and tune it up. Rathalos used to have an attack dubbed by fans as the Rathalos World Tour, where he would fly way up and encircle the map until he came back down diving in with his claws. This is not a fondly remembered move, mostly because it was insanely boring, and its presence diminished gradually until disappearing completely in generations. There was a neat addition made to it in 4 Ultimate where Rathalos could shoot off fireballs while this attack was going on, but the animation was still extremely slow. Now recently, this style of attack has been appropriated by Volstrax, who has made the move far more fun due to the insane speed he can reach. Additionally, looking at Monster Hunter Wilds, we seem to have combat areas that will be far more vast. Let's mash all of these ideas together. Azure Rathalos takes off, goes for the World Tour attack. He flies fast, not as fast as Volstrax, of course, but still fast. And what we do is keep Azure lower, and we have him move not as far away as Volstrax does, using the presumably nice big combat fighting zones in Wilds to give him more room to stretch, but not go too far away. He shoots off fireballs at players at a decent rate. In multiplayer, he'll change up his targets, making things nice and chaotic, before he comes crashing back in. The general idea is he flies slower, yet doesn't travel as far as Volstrax, kinda evening things out and having both attacks last for around the same amount of time, eliminating the miserable boredom that dealing with this move used to cause in its earlier incarnations. And that, ladies and gentlemen, is how I would make Azure Rathalos and Pink Rathian fun. I'd give them more hostile personalities, more punishable combos, and more reckless strategies to counterbalance their heightened speed and aggression. I'd make them into monsters that are incredibly satisfying to learn. I'd use a lack of move canceling and more static combo structures to sell their belligerent nature. I'd pick and choose a few moves from their pasts and the pasts of a few other Raths to flush them out a bit. I'd use some of the new tools that Rise and Sunbreak provided. I'd use the supposed map design of Wilds to my advantage, and I'd polish it all off with some fancy new attacks that emphasize their role as more powerful incarnations of the King of the Skies and Queen of the Land. There's only so much I can do with what I'm working with. Pink and Azure can be kinda tough to separate from the core Rathian and Rathalos due to the circumstances of their creation. I didn't want to fundamentally change what they were and how they worked. But I think what I have here is a pretty healthy selection of changes, subtle and grand, that can really solidify these two as their own distinct entities. What do you think? Did I hit the mark? Do my changes sound awful? What do you think could be done to make Azure and Pink stand out? What monsters should I cover in this series next? Let me know down below. This has been CR-Volcanic, or Connor. I'll see you around. Shout out to all the patrons, and special shout out to Nihilus Chimerax, Datboy Doindading, and Pico Plush. Thanks a lot, guys.